Which conspiracy theory came out real? That the sugar industry paid scientists to blame fat instead of sugar for heart disease and various other health issues. I actually cut a lot of sugar out of my life and I've felt less jumpy and agitated. I'm starting to learn more about how much sugar there actually is in everything we consume. It's insane. Even small amounts so we don't hate the food we eat. Crash gut. In a nutshell, Fernando Alonso is starting the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix from quite a bad position. Actually, the normal strategy when in a competitive car starting at the back is to load her up with fuel and go as far as you can into the race before pitting. Weirdly, Alonso is instead one of the first to pit. The only possible way this can work is if the safety car comes out due to how the rules are enforced. Well, exactly one lap later, Alonso's teammate has a big crash into the wall and brings out the safety car, allowing Alonso to go on and win. At the time, many were accusing Alonso's Renault team of fixing the result due to how convenient it was for the safety car to come out at exactly the right time after the other car crashed. But hey, that's just a coincidence, right? It wasn't a coincidence. It turned out Alonso's teammate was indeed told to crash by the team principal to benefit the team by scoring a win. This all came out in 2009, after the second driver lost his seat for not being quick enough. These are the two that come in my mind. Ustica. Tobacco company knew that the cigarettes caused cancer but they falsified the test so they can sell their product freely. How about when Johnson & Johnson knew that their talc powder had too much asbestos in it which can cause cancer and they kept selling it to be used on babies. They're still getting sued for mesothelioma and ovarian cancer. Lots of women used it on their lady parts. A man named John Warnowski used to stand outside the Vatican embassy the 90s in Washington, D.C. with a sign saying that the Pope is hiding pedophile priests. He claimed to be a victim of such abuse. People would honk and throw insults junk at him and call him crazy. I met him back in 2011. I recorded in my journal. There was a guy from Sauropope.com protesting in front of the Vatican embassy. I talked to him a little bit. He said he had been protesting at that location for the last 13 years because he was sexually abused when he was 15 years old and it negatively influenced his life. One you've never heard of. There were tales at my high school of the 100 Hall, where all the halls with numbered rooms and lockers started at 200 and went up. So there was number 100 Hall. The wild story was that it's underground, built to be a bomb shelter with stored non-perishables, and had entrances in the auditorium and gym. Turns out, absolutely true. The one aspect of it that didn't pan out was the attached tunnel that led to the science building at the local university. We had a similar story at my university. Secret tunnels under the campus. I think some do exist but I don't remember the story well enough. My mate was into YouTube conspiracy when it was big. I am talking lizard people type crap. He talked about this billionaire who has an island of little girls you can have sex with and drink wine. And drink wine lol. The Echelon program. I'm amazed this one doesn't come up more. It was treated as a real tinfoil hat loony conspiracy theory for years. I remember it being mentioned in a couple of films in the 90s. I think by crazy conspiracy theorist type characters. Then Snowden blew his whistle and I was amazed how many details were right. The CIA used military personnel with diagnoses of everything from depression to PTSD and even schizophrenia as guinea pigs for experimental medicines and treatments. They once gave a group of mentally ill men massive doses of LSD and left them all in a room for several days just to see what would happen. One survivor wrote that he spent those days perceiving the other men as living corpses and that the walls were covered in blood. There is no accurate number for how many people were killed or otherwise traumatized for life. Project MKUltra began in 1953 and continued for 20 years, only finally being dismantled in 1973. Keyword there officially. It probably is unofficially going on still. That various governments recorded, analyzed, and stored every single piece of digital information anyone shared with anyone else. For you younger people, this used to be one of those tinfoil hat conspiracies. I can remember when it first started to become known there were people who would argue they didn't care because they had nothing to hide and weren't guilty. Most of the ones I still know are the most rabid about gov going too far these days. It's kinda like former smokers can be the worst anti-smoking people. The CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran to install the Shah, who was more friendly to the US in the 1950s. The FBI and local law enforcement stalked, harassed, and blackmailed MLK Jr. They tried to get him to kill himself. They assassinated a leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago and then concocted bogus criminal charges against all the witnesses of the murder to lock them up and discredit them. They had undercover Leos infiltrate basically every single social justice movement and had a whole playbook based around how to make those movements look more radical, violent, dangerous than they actually are to discredit them. Undercover officers and confidential informants at protests throw bricks or try to start violence. Local law enforcement, prosecutors, and the FBI all lied to judges, juries, grand juries, legislatures, and Congress saying they never did things like this. People had to break into an FBI field office and steal documents to prove they were actually doing this stuff and had to keep their identities secret for decades so they wouldn't be prosecuted or persecuted for their actions. And the FBI and local law enforcement still do this stuff, but everyone acts like they don't. COINTELPRO will change the way you look at media, government, and law enforcement. Well, no one really knew about it until I believe the 90s, so there would have been no theorizing. But in the early 60s the US Joint Chiefs of Staff drew up a plan called Operation Northwoods in which they planned on staging and committing terror attacks across the US, only to turn around and blame it on Cuba in order to justify an invasion. You can see why JFK ended up dead. Crack epidemic was fueled and facilitated by the CIA. Documents came out proving the connection between Central American drugs for guns deals and distribution, though freeway rickross in LA in the 80s. Half of America is built on drug money, all of Florida at least. Haven't seen anyone talk about Malcolm X's assassination. An NYPD former officer talked about how NYPD and FBI worked together to get his bodyguards removed so that an assassination could take place. Yes, and they recently just exonerated the guys they pinned this on. I remember reading about Epstein's Island in 2012. It had a website and everything. Back then it was a conspiracy theory, but now it's all common knowledge. The Village People were paid by the US Armed Forces to write in the Navy, to be used as a recruiting tool towards gay people when the armed forces were banned from recruiting gay people. The Simpsons definitely clowned on this idea even EHT Niage. While not necessarily 100% proven true, there was a long and expensive congressional investigation into the John F. Kennedy assassination in the late 1970s. Their conclusion? That Kennedy was probably assassinated as part of a conspiracy. And nobody remembers. It's like the Snowden thing. Expect public outcry, get silence. MKUltra. A bunch of college kids in Montreal said that America was testing substances on them. Comes out later that the CIA had actually recruited hundreds of students at the University of McGill under the guise of participating in scientific research. The CIA proceeded to dose the poor students with insane levels of LSD and practiced torture and interrogation techniques on them. They also gave soldiers LSD. My dad was a Korean vet and he told me when I was a kid that they gave him something to dissolve in his mouth and he tripped for 3 days. He didn't know what it was. I'm assuming LSD. CIA-backed coups in socialist and or democratically elected countries. MKUltra, Tuskegee experiments. Nazis got the US to the moon. PRISM. Data mining. Panama Papers. Paradise Papers. And the most jarring being that 6 mega corporations own all US media outlets. It's actually 5 now. 2 core merged. The British royal family being deeply involved in an elite pedophile ring. Turned out only one was a pedophile and the rest were just happy for him to get on with it. More than one. Philip's uncle, Louis Mountbatten, whom Charles adored, has also been outed as a pedophile, but didn't stop William from naming both his sons after him. The whole German-Mexican thing before World War I. For those not familiar, Germany basically hit Mexico up and was like, hey, want some US land but Britain, I think, intercepted the message and gave it to the US, who were not amused. Mexico ended up dropping it. This is from memory, so correct me if I got something wrong. Good memory. It was called the Zimmerman telegram. Weird that Germany never gave it a thought that the telegraph lines that they used went through Great Britain and might be tapped. That kids' laughter is a better source of energy than their screams. This was revealed to be true in the tell-all documentary called Monsters, Inc. in 2001. Hottest take here. That there's a society of billionaires and millionaires who run a ring of children discreetly, and anyone who talks or goes to talk winds up dead. The movie and music industry, royal family, government, it runs really deep. MK Ultra, the Tuskegee experiments, the US and UK overthrowing Iran, Bush, Blair, and other leaders lying about Iraq, the Gulf of Tonkin, the Pentagon Papers, the list goes on and on. That the government is spying on you through your devices, which in retrospect made sense even back then, but we just didn't want to believe it. Alex Jones like 10 years ago was telling people that there was an island that famous people would be brought to and be filmed having sex with minors. As we now know, this was as Jeffrey Epstein's island. MK Ultra, a government project which was carried out by the CIA. This project was set to achieve mind control through torture, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and the use of different machinery and drugs. The American government experimenting on people without their knowledge or consent. Look up Tuskegee experiment. The really wild thing is that we all know this happened, and yet if you even suggest the possibility that the government would do something like it again, people dismiss you and act like you're a conspiracy theorist. It's both hilarious and pathetic. Didn't they also illegally sterilize many women? The existence of child sex trafficking rings with multiple high-ranking politicians being involved, which is unfortunately being overshadowed by the idiocy of canon as of late, to the point where anyone bringing it up is immediately associated with those nut jobs. That there were bodies of children who attended residential schools buried there that were never reported. For decades the local diocese of the Catholic Church, who call people making these claims lunatics and harassers, until ground surveying equipment found 215 in Kamloops, which in turn led to more searches and more bodies across the country. In Australia, when COVID first hit, the government introduced a mobile phone app for COVID Safe, where you can scan the QR code everywhere and it'll track where you are for contact tracing. The government said it's safe. We will only use the information gathered to track for COVID only. I said this. I'm refusing to use it because I don't trust the government. There's already been hacks in other government departments and personal data lost, and I don't trust the government app on my device where they can update and change what the program does. And I also don't trust them to not use the data for other reasons like they said they wouldn't. Note here, I'm not a conspiracy nut job. I do like a good conspiracy theory, but you need to use science and reason. I'm not canon or anything like that at all, and I'm double vaxxed and personally think anti-vaxxers are idiots. In this specific situation I didn't trust the program, data or government. Guess what happened? The government used the app and data for other things, like they said they wouldn't. Police in Queensland, Western Australia and Victoria have all owned up to trying to access logs of data created by Australians using check-in applications as part of their investigations. Western Australia had to actually enact a law stating that the data could only be used for COVID tracing. Western Australia police actually said it's not illegal for us to use the data, so we are going to continue to use the data if we see fit when questioned by the state government about what they were doing. The actual audacity. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.